All right, there is an update on this story of Pastor Chris Avell of Dad's Place Church in Bryan, Ohio. He's been battling Billy Hallowell joining me now. He's been battling the city on this, just trying to help people in need, homeless people, and apparently violating city ordinances. So gets in this tussle with the city. You talked to him recently, and since that conversation, there's been an update.
Yeah, we're going to play that conversation in a moment. And I talked to him as well as Jeremy Dys, his attorney with First Liberty. And the update, which they are not going to talk about in the interview, but we want to note before we run this, is that he has been found guilty of a criminal charge. And this surrounds a fire code violation. This entire thing, which they will talk about in detail, centers on, as you were saying, him housing the poor. I mean, keep in mind, it's freezing temperatures right now. The church now, I don't want to say housing the poor because the way that they word it is they're leaving the church open 24 hours a day for people to come in and take a break and rest and get warm, right? So because it's open 24 hours a day, people will obviously rest inside the church. But these fire violations that he's been accused of, this has been the centerpiece of this battle. And by the way, I should note that the police reportedly were bringing people to him before these violations. They were bringing people to the church and saying, hey, here's a warm place for you to go if they were homeless. But yeah, he's been found guilty of this criminal charge. And like you said, he's been fighting for a year now with the city of Bryan there. And just so people understand this update specifically, he was fined $200 and he was given a 60-day suspended jail sentence. And what that means, and I had to get clarity on this, right now there's a 30-day stay essentially, or a 30-day delay on this so that they can appeal. But that 60-day suspended jail sentence can't be put into place right now. But let's say the judge says, hey, after 30 days, this stands, we're going to reject your appeal. That means that he can get 60 days in jail if he doesn't sort of back down, which he has no plans to back down. So if he's found in violation again, he would go to jail for housing the poor.
This is literally incredible, horrible update here. And hopefully justice prevails in this one. You have a pastor here trying to help people and then is going through all of this. But any other updates, Billy, on what happened in this latest update? Before we play, I want to show everyone your conversation with the pastor just before this happened. So what else do you want to add on this update?
I want to add one thing. I think we want to be fair in how we approach it in that, look, there may be fire code violations, but one of the big questions, and this is something that maybe we'll dig into, if you're making Dad's Place update fire code, right? Are you doing that for every apartment building, every building in the city? Is this something that only new buildings have to do? And if it's truly a big concern, you would make everybody do it, right? If you're so fearful that people might die due to a fire violation, then every building should have to do it, I would assume. And I've heard that that is not the case, that every building is not being forced to retroactively go back and do this. So I just want to note that because it's sort of the backdrop, I think, of this situation.
Yeah, so these ordinances not being enforced equally, apparently. All right. That's the update on this story. We'll, of course, keep you updated with any further developments on this. But for now, I want to show you the full context and get you up to date with our conversation with Pastor Chris Avell of Dad's Place Church. Take a watch.
Chris, I want to start with you today. You have been locked in a legal battle with the town of Bryan, Ohio, over housing the homeless. This is a complicated story with a lot of different elements, but let's just start with, where did the issues begin? When did things go awry with Bryan officials?
Well, officially, I suppose back in November of 2023, we had received some officials came by and brought a letter that we were in violation of the zoning code. And that's kind of what kicked everything off. And we had 10 days to get people out of the church or whatever it was to get in compliance. And that's how we started.
And your church, so people understand, and this is for those who don't know the story, and then we're going to kind of get into what's been happening now, because it's been over a year, which is crazy, since this all began. But your church, Dad's Place, has been housing the homeless 24/7, helping people in the community, which is always important, but especially important when there are freezing temperatures out and people have nowhere to go. Talk a little bit about that mission, your decision to start housing the homeless, what that part of your program and ministry has been like.
Yeah, well, we actually didn't quite make any decision to house the homeless. We just decided to be open 24/7, and that we weren't going to ask people to leave unless we had a biblical reason. So what that resulted in is people of all different types coming in at all different times and staying all different durations. So some people come and stay for a moment. Some people come and stay forever. It feels like, and simply put, so we made that decision. We had prayed about it. We had, from before we actually opened our doors, the vision God had given us was that at the right time, we'd become 24/7. And we had lived that. It was interesting, Billy, because we were living that out prior to officially opening 24/7, because all the time at all hours of the night, and we'd get calls from the police department or from another church or from a hospital saying, hey, we have someone in need or this going on. And we'd go open the church doors and meet with them and say, hey, you can hang out here as long as you need. And then we officially, again, back in April, I believe, 23, said, we're going to do this in a kind of an official capacity and let everyone know our doors are open 24/7 and take the locks off the doors, so to speak. And it's been fantastic. But it wasn't specifically about housing the homeless. It was simply, hey, let's be the church 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that people could always come in and experience the love of Jesus, whether it's 2 a.m. or 2 p.m.
Yeah, being a place of refuge, let's say, is better wording than housing, obviously. A place people can go and experience God at any time of day. Jeremy, I want to come to you on this, being that you guys at First Liberty, you've been dealing with this case now for over a year. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster with the officials there, a lot of back and forth. You've looked at a lot of cases like this over the years. What has surprised you the most or shocked you the most about the handling of this particular case?
I think it's just the relentlessness of the aggressive attitude that Mayor Slade and the officials in Bryan, Ohio have taken towards Dad's Place. It's not uncommon for cities and counties to sort of take an action that they think is the best course of action, but to realize maybe that wasn't the best course of action after all. And then once they've had the law given to them, they sort of reconsider and find a way to work together. And we're all happy, and that's great. In this situation, it's almost as if the city has decided to dig their heels in, dig a little bit further, and anchor themselves there. All the while, they're using what the Attorney General of Ohio, Dave Yost, recently called the petty tools available to government to harass and harangue this congregation, whether that's fire inspections at 5:30 in the morning, bringing the police with the fire department to interrogate people sitting in the church during the day, or if it's using the zoning code in an aggressive manner, as they have, or the fire code in an aggressive manner, as they have. Look, they have gone out of their way to punish this church for merely existing. The reality is that what the zoning administrator told, or I think it was a police captain that told the pastor back in November 2023, is actual reality. They don't want the people in that church. They want them out. And they will not be satisfied until this church is shuttered, its doors are closed, and people are finding some other place, whether that's on a cold sidewalk inside of a dirty dumpster or somewhere in another county. They will not be satisfied until those people are gone. But thankfully, the law, I believe, is on our side. It's taken us a little while for us to get to that point, and too many courts in which to articulate it. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to find that the Constitution protects this church to be the church as it has been for so long.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Jeremy, to talk more about the legalities and where we are right now. But Chris, you've been on this journey for over a year, and obviously fighting with officials. Have you tried, and if so, take us through what you've done to come up with solutions to say, well, what if we did this? Would that work? If we made a change, would it appease the zoning requirements? What does that process look like, and what has shocked you the most about trying to navigate that?
Well, of course, from the beginning, I'm bound to the Word of God, and so our response as a church was to respond in accordance to what His will and His Word. And so we reached out to them. I personally called the mayor several times, saying, "Hey, let's just get together and talk, because we want to be good neighbors, and we love our community. We want to work together and continue to be a light in our community." And the calls were unreturned. I eventually got a hold of the zoning administrator. I said, "Hey, what can we do?" And he said, "Well, here, the legal process with them, with the city is you can get a variance or conditional use, but don't bother. He said they'll be denied. And I think he said that as a friend, saying it's not worth your efforts. And so I said, well, what do I do? And he said, well, here's what you should do. Close at 11 p.m. and open at 8 p.m. And I just said, well, I can't do that. I know this is what God has called us to do now at this time, is to open our doors 24/7. And I can't compromise on the calling God's placed on our church to be the church 24/7. And so I can't operate in what I would call cruelty, right? I just don't get, I honestly, poor Jeremy's heard me say this dozens of times. I really don't understand this at all. If we were open from 9 to 5, just any church, 9 to 5, let's say, and, in our lobby, we had a couch, and a man walks in during the day and he says, I'm exhausted. I just need to rest for an hour. How cruel would it be for me to say, hey, go and do well, but you can't rest here. And we're open 24/7, and we have a place where people can come in and rest. And really too, I believe it's a special type of rest too, when they come into the church, that they can actually experience this rest Jesus talks about, this rest for their souls, like an actual refreshing rest. And so again, we've tried to reach out. We've tried to different things as far as, okay, what does offensive sleep look like? Because it seemed at some point during this process there was an offensive form of sleep and a less offensive form of sleep. So maybe if you're laying on the floor, that's offensive, but if you're reclining in a chair, that's not offensive. So we got recliners, and that was a no-go. We've tried different. We said, okay, for a while, we kind of said you can bring in something that looks like this, not something that looks like that. I don't know. I've just lost. It's quite confusing to me, really. But at some point, just through prayer and through reading the Word and in my faith, I've said, who are we trying to serve here? At what point, Jeremy and I have had these talks. At what point are we, bowing before the statue? Because I become double-minded. That's unstable, right? Hey, everything we put into place at the church now, there's kind of this cloud of okay, what's the city going to think? And it's an awful way to live and operate. And it certainly doesn't allow us to glorify God the way we know we're commanded to. And so it's been confusing. But we've tried, again, so to answer your question, sorry, Billy, we've tried many things from recliners to, okay, you could just lay on the chairs. You have to be on the floors. You have to, here's what you can do during the day. Here's what you can do during the night. During a time when Judge Stelzer here had passed the injunction, we just had an all-night worship service, and which is a wonderful thing. But again, if you're someone who comes in and what you really need is some rest, and there's all sorts of things going on, certainly that inhibits it. And it felt a little uncomfortable for me because the purpose of it, just being sincere, wasn't actually at the time worship. Yes, we always worship the Lord. I believe in all we do in the church, we're worshiping the Lord. But it was not for that purpose. It was for the purpose of saying, don't fall asleep. You can't fall asleep. Quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. I want to ask you both this, and I'll start with you, Chris, and then Jeremy, I want to come to you on the legalities again. But when you look at this situation and you're looking at government regulations, zoning issues, Chris, what do you think is motivating this? Because you've both described this as relentless. Is this, in your view, big government run amok? Is it anti-faith? What do you think is motivating this ongoing legal battle?
Well, I believe the word, and that's our battle, is not against flesh and blood. So I think there's a greater motivation here. And I think, what I see in people's personal lives is the enemy often comes in kind of covertly, right? He kind of slips in under the radar. And, if we as the church say, hey, the government can dictate what church service means. So not the word of God. If we say the word of God can no longer dictate what the church is, who they are, what they do, but instead insurance company or a government agency can dictate the church, that's a very slippery slope. And I think from their perspective, the city, I think, no one likes pushback, right? No one in authority. Listen, in church, I'm in authority, and I can struggle with this too, right? When someone pushes back against me, but I think anyone in authority, they struggle with pushback. And I think when the zoning stuff went down, the expectation was we would just say, okay, we're going to stop our 24/7 ministry. And when that didn't happen, that could be some people, if you're the personality type, maybe an A type, or I don't know about personality types, but you say, okay, well, we're going to do the next thing to make sure our will is done. And
it's a power struggle at some point. It becomes a power struggle.
Yeah, I think there's a spiritual power struggle going on, and it's manifesting itself as a city versus church power struggle. And but you and I know, and Jeremy knows, that in the end, God gets the glory no matter what happens, and that's how we can just operate in joy even through all these trials. And there's been some very stressful days, weeks, but God is good, and He comes out victorious.
Jeremy, I'd love for you to react to the same thing, but I also have to ask you if you can help us understand legally what's going on right now. There is an injunction, which I believe means Dad's Place can continue being open 24/7 right now, but there's a legal battle still going on. There have been criminal charges in the past as well aimed at Chris. Can you take us through that sort of timeline and where we are right now, legally speaking?
Yeah, I'll try to be as concise as I can because it's complicated. It's in 3 different courts right now, and so you can imagine how complicated this entire litigation is. Let me start where you ended. The criminal charges, Chris was tried, actually. He went through a trial right after Thanksgiving. In fact, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, he was in a court where thieves and robbers had sat before. He was sitting in the same chair being tried in front of a judge. And we're waiting for that verdict to come out. We expect that'll happen in the next couple of weeks. But on the civil side, here's the best way to understand this. If you remember back during COVID, we had all kinds of city and county officials that would say, churches cannot meet. There are places of spreading events or whatever you might have. But movie theaters and big box stores, things like that, no problem. You can go to those and just make sure you stay 6 feet apart and wear a mask. Well, that's essentially what's happening here, where the city is saying that this church cannot be open 24 hours a day and people can't fall asleep inside of it because, of course, that's a huge danger. There's a risk that people would fall asleep in the middle of the night on the first floor of this building and they wouldn't be able to get out. And so they need a fire suppression system. That's what the city is now saying. Well, that's an onerous, difficult, and expensive thing to be able to install. So you would expect if that concern about people falling asleep on the first floor, if that's the real concern that the city has, that they would enforce that everywhere that is a possibility. So, for instance, the town has 3 motels. All of them are 1-story dwellings. Well, on those 1-story dwellings that are motels in the city of Bryan, Ohio, they do not have fire suppression systems installed there. And the city says, well, they're grandfathered. Well, then it must be that your concern about the fire safety risk is not that compelling, because if it was, you would require them to get those suppression systems put in place. But it's not just in motels. You also have apartment complexes where people on the first floor fall asleep. Those apartment complexes, multiple apartment complexes in Bryan, Ohio, are not required to be sprinkled. You also have senior living facilities, 1-story senior living facilities inside of Bryan, Ohio, that are not required to have a fire suppression system. So here you have the city saying it's so important for people to be safe and not fall asleep on the first floor without a fire suppression system to watch over them. So much so that they have filed 2 civil lawsuits against, one civil lawsuit against the church, and also criminal charges against the pastor for failure to have these fire suppression systems. By the way, they gave the pastor 1 week in order to install that system. In other situations with similar and lesser charges against area businesses, they gave them 30 days to have it installed, but let's not get distracted. The reality is that they have singled out this church for requirements to be installed that they don't require of other area motels, apartment complexes, and senior living facilities. And just like it was unconstitutional for cities and counties across the country to require churches to shut down during COVID for fear of spreading a massive virus, but allowing Walmart and the movie theaters to remain open, the same thing is true here. That was found to be unconstitutional then. This will ultimately be vindicated in the court of law as well as we continue up the legal process here. It's just simply a matter of fairness. You cannot use the petty tools of government to harass and harangue a church and not expect the same thing in the same type of risky behavior, so-called, of other area businesses like motels, apartment complexes, and senior living facilities. It's simply unfair, and that leads to it also being unconstitutional.
So we're waiting for the criminal, obviously, to get a result from the criminal charges that were waged, and he went on trial in November for that after Thanksgiving. What else are we waiting on at this current moment, legally speaking?
We're on appeal to a state court, appellate court in Ohio as well, since we had a negative decision come out from the local county court of claims, common pleas rather. And so we've appealed that case to the 6th District Court in Ohio. That's an Ohio state court, not to be confused with the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is federal. But we are also in the municipal court. That's where he's being criminally tried. So we're waiting that verdict to come out. And if it goes negatively, of course, we will appeal that decision as well. I think it goes to the same 6th District Court of Appeals in Ohio. But at the same time, we filed a federal lawsuit back in January of 2024. That lawsuit remains active. And that encompasses not just these fire code claims, which is what the other appeals are all about right now, but it also challenges the imposition of the zoning laws against this church as well. And so that case is very much active. In fact, we've got some requirements to report back to the court at the end of this month as to what the future of that litigation looks like. So if you're keeping track at home, right now we are actively engaged in litigation in 3 different courts. And we can actually count further out from that, but let's just stay with 3 because it's confusing enough. And well, 3 is a Trinitarian number, and that's probably appropriate for this situation anyway.
All right, one more question on this, Jeremy. The criminal charges, what's the maximum penalty for Chris if he is found guilty, let's say?
This is where I always get discouraged. I have to talk about things like this because I don't want to discourage my client in any way. But look, these are ruinous penalties for one thing. They could be disastrous financial penalties that could come with this. And I think similar to a traffic ticket, but adding probably another 0 at the end of that traffic ticket that you might get, that would be sort of what would be on him. And it would be a per day violation. So it could add up very quickly. They could add more charges if he doesn't come into compliance. It's very serious. But, and I hate to add this part because I don't think it'll go this way, but the law does allow for it. The law would allow the judge to incarcerate Pastor Avell as well. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I hope it will not happen. But I would be remiss as an attorney to tell you that is amongst the possibilities, that if he's convicted, he could face not just penalties, but he could also face some jail time as well.
So there's a lot really on the line here. Chris, coming back to you, what has been going on in your ministry? I mean, have you been able to continue in light of all of this? Obviously, you have the injunction. How many people are coming in? I mean, what has it been like to operate and forge on in light of these multiple legal battles?
First of all, I've got to say, by the grace of God, and with his help through First Liberty, that's incredible that he sent this army to come defend us in the legal arena, which we have no idea what we're doing. But it's we haven't been shut down really an hour. There was that short period when the state or whatever it was injunction was in place, but then that got stayed, where we kind of had to operate in a way different than we felt comfortable. It's just been incredible. So people are still coming through the doors every day and going out the doors every day. We operate as a church. We have classes 7 days a week. And it's just amazing to see what God is doing. We continually have people who walk through the door who have never heard or received the gospel. And that's what drives us. One thing that stood out to me in this, Billy, just really as I was praying, was it's kind of like the fire chief and the city have been kind of messengers of what God is trying to tell, I believe, the church, because the fire chief is coming in and saying the church needs to wake up because people are in fire danger. And I'm like, that's exactly our message. The church needs to wake up because people are in fire danger, right? I mean, that's our message, not ours, but just the message to the church in America, right? Wake up. People are in fire danger. And so it's kind of, it hasn't been lost on me through prayer that, this is just what God does. He's sending a message. They're concerned about people physically waking up because they're in physical fire danger. We're worried about the church waking up because people are in fire danger, the dangers of the fires of hell. And they walk through that door every day, hear the gospel, get saved by grace through faith in Christ. Their lives are transformed. They're baptized, and they go out and make disciples. And that's what we should be seeing in every church around America. And so we're excited in that sense. And this has been a heavy load, but I have friends like Jeremy, you're speaking with now, and Ryan and Lisa and Phil and Steve and a whole bunch of people. It's just incredible to kind of, hold up my hands when I'm weak. So it's just been an incredible journey. And I'm really thankful for it, as much as I do stress about it. And I've got to stay focused and not be double-minded. Again, I think that's the biggest challenge, Billy. If you're going to say what's the biggest challenge for our church, it is going, what would Jesus do, right? The old, what would Jesus do? And not going, what would the city think?
Yeah.
Right? So we've got to operate under what would Jesus do and not operate under what would the city think.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time, coming on today, breaking this down. We're going to continue to cover this story at CBN News. Appreciate you both.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Billy.